Kia ora, good evening. Welcome to the Guerin Report. I'm Michael Guerin and thank you for taking time out of your Monday to join us. Like you, I didn't enjoy my racing experience at Hawke's Bay on Saturday, all one race of it. When that level of disappointment and frustration hits us in the industry, there are questions. We're going to try and answer some of those tonight with the Chief Executive of New Zealand Thoroughbred Racing, Bruce Sharrock. Some of those questions we will not be able to answer tonight. We will do our best. Bruce, good evening. Thank you for joining us. How did you feel when you got the phone call on Saturday?
Look, Mick, as I reflected on a myriad of emotions, I think frustration was sitting at the top of the list. And frustration primarily because this is a theme that is recurring far too frequently. I can sit here and pontificate about many things as to why it's happening, but the fact of the matter it is, and we need to get on top of it somehow.
2 days after the event, do we actually know what went wrong and why? Is this a weather issue? Is this human error? Or more damagingly, is this Hastings track not fit for racing at the moment?
Look, Mick, as I sit with you this evening, I mean, the reality is I'm waiting for a comprehensive report from Hawke's Bay, which hopefully will try and illuminate exactly what caused the issue. To your last question, there is a consistent theme here that is concerning. As we know with some of our infrastructure around the country, it's been underinvested for decades, and potentially Hawke's Bay is in that boat where we have to make significant investment to ensure that it continues to race consistently and safely.
We're going to look at the incident which everybody who watches trackside has seen. Obviously, looking at the horse 3 wide, leaving the straight, there is a slip. That was so significant. I'm comfortable with the RIB's actions after this event. Was NZTR comfortable with not only the RIB's actions, but the actions of our jockeys?
Yeah, look, in short, Mick, yes. A lot of work's gone in by Darren and the team to ensure that we follow this protocol. It hasn't been consistent up till now, but the feedback I've had, I wasn't on course on Saturday, but the feedback I've had is the process was followed well by the RIB and well by the jockeys. And so, look, we're satisfied that ultimately the right decision was made. It was unsafe to race, and that decision, hard decision as it was made to abandon that meeting. This
is the second time in 2 years at the Bay this meeting has been abandoned for vastly different reasons. It's important to mention that they are different reasons, and our raft of abandonments over various tracks, as we look at the footage from 2 years ago, this was a washed out meeting. There seems to be an array of problems which probably go back to infrastructure, but on this specific incident, there seems to be an area where, and we'll show you the drone footage here so people can play this out in their mind, as we go down the straight at Hastings and we leave the straight, there is a slight camber which eventually rolls into a crown and then actually a negative camber coming out of the back of the straight. So here's the home straight, jockeys, horses, comfortable. The trainers I spoke to said this part of the track felt fine. Once they get past the winning post coming up here, Bruce, the camber is not consistent, and that appears to be the issue, particularly when the inside rail goes out 3 metres. Is that your understanding of the problem, and what can you do when a track is incorrectly cambered?
Yeah, look, it is one of the contributing factors, and it appears to be a consistent part of the track that has, caused issues in the past. What can we do? I mean, clearly a reconstruction. The cambers have to be reinstated at a level that's going to give you a consistent feel as you go around those turns. So, yeah, that's what I'm saying. We have to now seriously look at what investment and what we can do to ensure that the venue is safe to continue racing.
For those people who were watching on Saturday, of course, the rail was out 3 metres. The horse who slipped was probably 4 or 5 metres off that rail, hence it was racing on a part of track which wasn't raced on the first day, Bruce. That may be one part of the equation. We also had the fact that the track was watered through that part of the track. That section of the track was more watered than the rest of the track. Now, let's get to track managers. We are told that Bryce Milden is extremely good at his job and walks the track twice a day, and he made the decision to water that. Are you comfortable with that decision that some parts of a track need to be watered more or less than other parts of the track, or should racetracks be watered exactly the same for every single part of it?
Well, again, as I said, the caveat I'm going to put on this is I'm not qualified to give you that. What I have had explained to me is the rationale why the watering took place. Fundamentally, Bryce, who is very thorough and a very, very good operator, walks the track with a moisture meter, and what he discovered was that part of the track was slightly drier than the rest of the track, so he chose to water it to bring it back up to a consistent level right around the track circumference. That logic makes sense because I think the other thing that often our participants are asking for is a consistent track, and when you've got inconsistent moisture and firmness or otherwise within the track, that's what's causing some of these issues. So the logic of what's been explained to me makes sense. Did it and could it have had an impact on the outcome? That's what we need to get to the bottom of.
It raises a bigger question about racing in the Bay. The Hawke's Bay have had these track issues, and they have been relatively regular, far more regular than we would like. They also have issues with earthquake compliance around some of their buildings, and they are at least discussing the potential for a green fields project to build a new track and to sell this track to enable that track to be funded. Where does that sit at with the moment, that process with Hawke's Bay Racing?
Yeah, look, and what that does, Mick, is it accelerates the decision and the discussion we have to have around their future full stop in terms of location. You're right, they've been exploring purchasing land, and in fact they have done so, and we've supported them in doing so, to look at a greenfields opportunity. The latest information I have is there's probably a sway to return back to the existing track, but clearly, as you pointed out, the facilities, stands in particular, need to probably be knocked over. So there's a large investment required at Hawke's Bay. I think fundamentally, and this afternoon we've had a board meeting to discuss, I guess, not only what's happened on Saturday, but where Hawke's Bay sits in the network for New Zealand Thoroughbred racing. And look, we believe it is still a strategic venue for New Zealand Thoroughbred racing. What we need to do is come together and get the right outcome. And look, this message is something that needs to go far and wide. At all times now, we need to start coming together and collaborating to get these outcomes, because we all rely on the outcomes that we're trying to drive for.
I think everybody loves racing at the Bay. They love the idea of the Triple Crown, but it is an awfully long way from the majority of our Group 1 horse population at Cambridge, at Briley Park, and of course at Matamata. Is it time now when we ask whether we should be transporting our best horses 4.5 hours to race when there are at least better tracks, or tracks as good, closer to them? And that question extrapolates out to horses being flown to Riccarton for the 1 in 2,000 guineas. Do we need to be having Group 1 racing? We can still have a carnival at the Bay, but would it really affect their bottom line if they didn't have the best horses there and they just had a big party and a big race meeting without the Group 1?
Oh, look, there's a lot that you've asked there, and there's a lot to unpack in that. I think I'd challenge you 4.5 hours. I don't think it's that far from Matamata to Hawke's Bay. I think by the time you leave Matamata and get up to Ellerslie on a bad traffic day, you're not going to be vastly different. So,
but wouldn't you hope heading forward you're going to have a better and more consistent track at either Matamata, Te Rapa or Ellerslie, and it's therefore closer to not only your population, but it's less and less taxing travel than it is to Hastings?
Oh, look, 100%. But I think the other thing that historically, and the reason that we see Hawke's Bay being strategic, is what it does offer in the spring is generally, and clearly you brought up 2022 where there was a washout. We've had the issue today, albeit day one was absolutely perfect and glowing reviews of that track. But the reality is, if we think that Hawke's Bay is a strategic venue and it offers us the start to our group season in spring racing and generally gives us a different soil and a different opportunity, other than Ellerslie, it probably is the track that we need to keep in our network, because it does cater for the CD horses as well, and it does cater for, and not that far away, three and a bit hours from the Matamata Cambridge destinations to get to to get to Hawke's Bay. So look, that decision is one that we need to reinforce, but as I sit here with you today, it is a strategic venue for us.
There were 12 jump outs held on Monday morning at Hastings. The senior jockeys reported the track was fine underfoot on this occasion. What information do you take into play and do you think about when the board meets to decide whether the Livermore meeting will be held at Hastings or need to be moved somewhere else? And if the meeting isn't safe for a Livermore, is it therefore not safe for all races? Can you just not move the Group 1? If the meeting's good enough for the Group 1, it's good enough for racing.
100%. I would agree with that. I mean, if the track is going to be good enough for a Group 1, it's good enough for racing. If it's not good enough for racing, we need to move it, and we need to make that decision decisively before too many costs are incurred for that big day.
Can Hawke's Bay, which earn about 70% of its income for the year, I believe, from the hospitality, can they afford to lose a Livermore meeting if we are having these issues?
Having not seen their 23-24 financials, they're probably in front of the auditor as I speak. I don't know the financial status in detail, but I'd suggest it would put them in serious financial pain. So whilst that is I guess something that we need to consider in making a decision, it can't be the reason. What we have to have at the very forefront is it going to be safe to race? Will we get a good race day out of it? And if the answer is somewhat doubted, then I think we have to make a decision.
Does your organisation, are you confident NZTR has the right staff with the right skill sets and enough staff to run New Zealand thoroughbred racing the way you would like?
Just to clarify your question, are you talking in the track management space or are you talking more generally?
I'm talking about the logistics of racing. I'm not talking about the gambling side because Entain have more or less taken that over. The marketing side, I don't think it bothers people. I don't think they care about that quite as much as they care about the race meetings getting off the ground. The logistics of getting race meetings and starting gates and everybody where they need to be to make the machine work. Do you have enough staff and the right staff to make that happen?
Look, that's a big question. In short, I believe that if you go back to when the new Act came in 2020, New Zealand Racing Board was disbanded, a lot of functions flowed down to the codes, and clearly being the biggest code, there was no exception. You know, we've operated on the same head count for the last period that I've been there. What I do think it's becoming more complex. Issues such as health and safety have really exacerbated the focus on, for example, tracks. You know, animal welfare and our social licence to operate. These are big issues, and you know, I've got a team of two people, two very competent people in social welfare. But at the end of the day, if we're going to get serious about it, we do have to make sure that we are well resourced with the right people to get on top of these.
Do you need more staff?
I think we do. I think we do, and the reason I say that is we've got 4 years to work with Entain to ensure that we are in the best position possible to be a sustainable model outside of the minimum guarantee. I recently put out a strategic document for the next 4 years, and there are some key things in there that we need to achieve. I think to accelerate that would be a good thing to do, and therefore we need to invest in it. You know, what I do know is that there is always a pull on every dollar, probably 8-10 times everybody wants a dollar, whether it's state funding, animal welfare, you know, IT. There is always a pull on the dollar. What we have to do is strategically stand back and go, what's most important and what can we do?
If we need more staff and we need more money to fix racetracks and make sure our infrastructure works, because it's got to work, otherwise the game stops. There's two ways I can see us getting it. One is the legislative net or geo-blocking, which some people hate and don't want to come in, but it will trigger a $100 million payment from Entain, which would seem to me to be money we need. The other thing, Bruce, we have are some racing clubs in this country who do not race at the moment and may not be racing much in the future, who seem to want to keep these valuable assets for themselves rather than selling them for the good of the game. Is that good enough for you as a man who's been charged to make racing run, but we don't seem to all be rowing in the same direction on that? So I'll go to the clubs first and the tracks. We'll talk about the geo-blocking after that.
Yeah, look, you've touched on venues, and look, venues for me has been a work on for the last 2 years, or 2 and a bit years that I've been in the role, coming up 3 years. We are making progress in that space, but it needs to speed up because...
What's the hold-up?
Look, what people don't appreciate is the complexity that lies around the Racing Act and the constitutions that run our whole entire operation. And whilst it's easy to sit there and say constitutions, get rid of them, just carry, we are bound by those. You've seen it recently with New Zealand Rugby. We are no different. We have club constitutions and we have a responsibility to go through a process with the Act. And we are making good progress, I can assure you of that. And in the coming week or so, there'll be something for the industry to consume on that.
What about Avondale? Look, Avondale seems to be this rather large package of land in Auckland, which at the moment the industry is not using, apart from for trials. Where do the negotiations stand there? Because I do realise, and I respect their history, that is a very sensitive subject. It's also a very potentially profitable subject.
Yeah, look, I won't get into detail for the commercial sensitivity, Mick, but what I will say to you is in the next week, I would hope that the industry will see the progress we have made, and Avondale have been working with us over the last 12 months in a really positive way about finding a solution here. And I am encouraged by where we will end up. I just wish we could hurry up. But that's something that I've got to respect. There's a lot of history, heritage, and as I just said, there is an Act and there is a process, and people have to understand that. It's all very easy to say just go and do something. The reality is you are bound by Act and law and constitutions.
Geo-blocking is now being termed as a legislative net, and it is the ability to say overseas operators can't have New Zealand punters bidding with them. As I mentioned, it triggers a $100 million payment, but also ongoing payments because the TRB and NTAM will be making more money. There can be no doubts. Is this now an indication of how crucial that money will be if we don't have that pot of money or we aren't able to sell these packages of land? Are we even going to be able to change any of this?
Yeah, look, again, a really good question. I've recently completed the roadshows, Mick, from sort of Invercargill up to Auckland here. And what I've sort of said to the industry, there are two key levers that we have to, I believe, firmly make us a sustainable and an exciting industry going forward. And one of them, as you've touched on, is the GeoNet or the legislative net or whatever title you want to give it. And the other one is the optimisation of our venues. So if you come to the GeoNet, yeah, absolutely we need that capital. I think more than that though, what happened with the first 150 million that NTAM paid to sport and the codes was sort of allocated by performance over the first 5 years. I've spoken recently to the new board of the TAB because ultimately that's where the 100 million goes. It goes to the board of the TAB to decide what they do with it. It doesn't have to be allocated on performance, it does, as it was in the first round.
And last month, there was more money gambled on sport in this country than horse racing.
Oh, correct, and that's a worldwide phenomenon, right? There is a bigger growth in sport than there is in racing across the globe, having recently returned from Japan. But my point is that the industry that we are part of has a much higher infrastructure requirement, not only currently with some of the issues that we're being presented with today, but equally ongoing. So a disproportionate of that amount, in my view, should be coming to this code. Why? Because this code also has the profile to raise the tide on racing as a whole in this country. And so for me, the board of the TAB needs to pick its winners commercially and look to where it can invest that money strategically to get the best outcomes for the racing industry as a whole. And I'd like to think we're at the front of the queue.
It's the most boring word in racing, governance. But is our governance right? Do we have enough governance where NZTR can tell the clubs, down through track managers, down through promotions people, down through everybody who works there, how to do their business? Or are we, or you, an umbrella over a myriad of mini businesses?
Look, you're again touching on a really, really key point. Go back to the Guerin Report. One of the key things he talked about was the governance standards that exist within racing. Again, no different to these 100-plus-year-old sports or industries that have existed on historic constitutions that thought it was a good idea at the time to draft them the way they did. But they are legal and binding. What we're looking for is cooperation. I believe the governance standards across the board, gone are the days where we can rely on a group of volunteers to prepare a track safely, because the health and safety requirements are so much greater today than they were a decade ago, let alone 50 years ago, that we need to get with the program and we need to collaborate and come together to make it work. It's that simple. And I just, I encourage clubs to take a step back and go, would we be better working collectively than on our own?
Let's talk about something far easier to solve. Jumps racing and the jumps racing review submissions. 240 of them come in. True. How many have you seen and what's the tone of them?
Look, yeah, first thing I'd like to say is that, I was encouraged by the level of engagement from from the industry really, primarily the jumps fraternity and those pro about it. Yeah, look, when I say I've seen them all, I've viewed them all. What I need to say is probably 70% of them were a vote, yes or no, which, thank you for the vote. It was never about that. It was about trying to find solutions to sustain jumps racing, or the counterfactual is what would it look like if jumps racing wasn't here, and what can we do to benefit the industry. As I say, look, probably 10 to 15% of them, of that remaining 30, had some really good detailed thinking around, structures of courses, locations, engagement with Trans-Tasman, all of these sorts of initiatives. What is interesting, and I reached out to Aaron Morrison over the weekend, who's the new CEO at Vic. They clearly now are going under a full review as well, not an internal review. So
Racing Victoria, just for people at home, Racing Victoria are doing the same thing you're doing?
They are now, yeah. And I caught up with Aaron in Japan, and he alluded to that the pressure had come on. They had that terrible day at Ballarat. And so, he's now, so I'm going to hook up with him and have a chat. And because part of what we were talking about in the first panel discussion, which took place last Tuesday, a lot of it was really positive stuff around how we could, I guess, reconfigure the industry here, some of the initiatives, and some of it was collaborating a lot closer with Victoria, whether it was jockeys being able to come across and getting our dates lined up and all that sort of Trans-Tasman.
Will their decision impact on our decision and vice versa?
Too early to say. I haven't spoken to Aaron. I mean, that news came out late last week, and so I want to have that conversation with him.
What happens next? So the submissions have come, and I believe there is a committee of 5 people, a very fair committee, I must say. 2 of them seem to be jumps-centric, shall we say. Yep. And a very smart man has been put as an overseer of the process, who's very fair, and Alan Galbraith, who I spoke to last week for this show. And he won't put up with any shortcuts or any nonsense. No. So what happens next? Yeah,
so look, the process is underway. The panel's come together. It's an independent panel that I thought we got good balance and selection on. They have a terms of reference, and fundamentally that's going to be aligned to our strategic plan. So they're making decisions based on things like welfare, horse and human, infrastructure, revenue growth, marketing and community engagement. How does jumps play a part in that? Because that fundamentally is what our business is driven by. So the terms of reference they're very clear on. As I said, the first panel discussion was last Tuesday. I sat in for quite a bit of it, and I was encouraged by the openness and the willingness to explore both sides. So yeah, at the end of it, we're looking for a recommendation that Alan Galbraith will review with myself and ultimately come to the board with a recommendation, hopefully by the end of October.
People in racing love to get very personal because most of us own horses or back horses or love horses. I'll ask you a personal question. You and your brother and one of your best friends own a wonderful galloper, just ask me. Would we be having a jumps review if you and your mates owned a West Coast?
Personally, yes. With the job that I'm in, yes, 100%. Look, at the end of the day, we have to get this business right-sized and shaped for a future beyond, and I keep saying in the roadshows, it's not about those present in those roadshows. It's about the kids and grandkids of those people that want to enjoy this industry for another 2, 3, 4, 5 decades. And so we have to start getting things right that are going to see us be sustainable. And, the other little analogy I'm using, back in 1965, there was a song, Rugby, Racing and Beer. We were part of the sporting landscape and fabric of this country. We've fallen out of that conversation. We need to come back into that conversation, and there's a lot of things we have to do that. And one is be relevant, and one is operate under the social licence, and I know people don't like that word, but it is a reality in 2024, and we need to be very, very conscious of it.
Last week, NZTR released a report on synthetic tracks, and it encompassed everything from track safety to turnover to how they have worked. I think it was very timely. Are you comfortable with the numbers you saw there across a range of things, which included a very small horse mortality rate, and how much people are willing to bet on synthetic racing?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing I'd say to that, Mick, before I answer that question, is the misinformation that floats around this industry needs to stop. Because at the end of the day, the power of social media today gives people the ability to put out an opinion based on limited fact to zero fact, and unfortunately, it becomes fact all too quickly. What the report did, and again, I give credit to the team, it showed that, synthetic racing does have a slightly higher or elevated mortality rate to turf, but not so much more so than a good track and a synthetic track. I mean, for those that have read the report, you will see that Cambridge, who's got the biggest data set over 3 years, operates at the same level of 0.5 per thousand runners as a good track in New Zealand, a good turf track. So look, we've got with Awapuni and Riccarton, a much smaller data set, so any fatality seems to throw that out really quickly. The other point to note is that from an international standing, the US and UK, who both operate on these surfaces, are at 0.97 and 0.92, I think, respectively. So again, we're monitoring performance. We need to get better. We need to get the machinery and investment into those tracks because they are wagering okay.
Let's end on a positive note. They've been hard to find in the last couple of days, although there is Group 1 racing coming up at Matamata on Wednesday, which is going to be kind of fun. The NZB Kiwi, one of the slot holders, has decided not to press on with their slot. A new slot holder has been found. I think it's one which is going to embellish the race. You can tell us who that is.
Yeah, look, as industry will know, we went and ran a tender process to pick up that slot that you referred to, and Waikato Stud have been the leading tender, and I think they're a huge addition to the race. I mean, we all know the rich history of the stud, of Waikato Stud, and so, you know, to Mark and Gary Chittick, thank you, and we look forward to being with you and part of you through this exciting summer racing.
Mate, we're looking forward to the NZB Kiwi, we're looking forward to the summer, we're looking forward to Wednesday, even though we didn't think it was going to be there. Thank you for coming in and answering most of our questions. There'll be more questions coming. There'll be more
Sure.
Bruce Sharrock on the Guerin Report. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Mick. Appreciate it.
Well, to everybody out there, we've asked some questions. I know you've got more. We'll keep on top of these stories and see how the developments are with our venues over coming months here on the Guerin Report. Thank you for taking the time to join us on a Monday. We look forward to being back with you next Monday on Trackside and trackside.co.nz.